I watched my father's pickup truck getting towed away from his driveway, and I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no sadness, just a quiet sense of justice finally arriving at the doorstep of the people who had terrorized me my entire life. The foreclosure sign swayed gently in the autumn breeze, and somewhere inside that house, the two people who called themselves my parents were probably scrambling to figure out what went wrong. They would never suspect that their own daughter, the one they had beaten down for 28 years, had been the one to light the match that burned their empire of cruelty to the ground. But I am getting ahead of myself. If you are enjoying this story of standing up against toxic family members, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of people who fought back and won. Drop a comment below telling me about your own experiences with difficult family situations. Your story matters too. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the night that changed everything. It was a Sunday evening in late September, and I was trapped in my childhood home with my 6-year-old son Leo. The moment I stepped into that kitchen, the smell hit me like a physical force. Overcooked cabbage, stale beer, and something else I could never quite name but had learned to associate with misery. It was the smell of my entire childhood condensed into one room. My mother Carol stood at the stove stirring a pot of soup with more violence than was strictly necessary. Her face locked in that permanent scowl she reserved specifically for me. From the living room, I could hear my father Frank bellowing at the television. "Come on, you useless piece of garbage." My grandmother could have caught that ball, and she's been dead for 20 years. The sound of a beer can cracking open punctuated his rant. That would be his 5th one today, though it was barely 7 in the evening. I was not visiting. God, I wish I had been visiting. 3 months earlier, the small law firm where I had worked as an administrative assistant for 6 years went under. The senior partner had been embezzling from client trust accounts, and when it all came crashing down, 23 people lost their jobs overnight. I had 2 weeks of severance pay and a resume that suddenly felt worthless in a town where legal jobs were scarce. 2 weeks after that bomb dropped, my boyfriend Marcus delivered the second blow. We had been together for 4 years, had talked about marriage, had looked at apartments together. He came home one evening, would not meet my eyes, and said the words that still made my stomach clench when I thought about them. "Sarah, I need some space. I think we should take a break." Space meant another woman. Break meant it was already over. I found out later through a mutual friend that he had been seeing someone from his gym for 3 months. Someone younger, someone without a kid. Someone whose life was not complicated. So there I was, 28 years old, single, unemployed, with a 6-year-old son, and exactly $287 in my checking account. My lease was up, my landlord would not renew, without proof of employment, and I had nowhere else to go. Which is how I ended up back in the house I had sworn, at age 18, I would never step foot in again. The house where my childhood had not just died, but had been systematically murdered, one small trauma at a time. My father had made sure I stayed trapped from day one. The first week was almost pleasant if you did not count the constant criticisms and the way Carol would sigh dramatically every time Leo made any noise. But then came the car situation. I woke up one morning to find my 12-year-old Honda Civic would not start. Just clicking sounds when I turned the key, no engine turnover, nothing. Frank happened to be in the driveway working on his truck. "Problem?" he asked, not looking up from whatever he was doing under his hood. "My car won't start," I said. "I have a job interview this afternoon. I really need it to work." Frank finally looked at me, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. "Pop the hood. Let me take a look." He spent 20 minutes poking around under the hood, making those knowing sounds that mechanics make. Finally, he straightened up and shook his head. "Your alternator is shot. Battery too, probably. The whole charging system is fried." My heart sank. How much would that cost to fix? Parts and labor, you are looking at $1,500, maybe $2,000. That is if there is not other damage I am not seeing. He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was telling me the weather forecast. "I don't have that kind of money," I said quietly. Frank shrugged. "Tell you what, I will fix it when I can. Got to order the parts, find some time. Might take a few weeks." He went back to his truck conversation over. That was 3 months ago. Every time I asked about the car, there was a new excuse. The parts were back ordered. He was too busy with other jobs. He had hurt his back and could not do the heavy lifting required. Next week. Always next week. It took me 2 months to realize what should have been obvious from the start. Frank had sabotaged the car himself. He wanted me dependent. He wanted control. And a car meant freedom, meant I could pack up Leo and leave whenever I wanted, and Frank could not tolerate that. That Sunday evening, Leo had been trying so desperately to be good. My little boy with his soft brown eyes and gap-toothed smile that could melt anyone's heart had been walking on eggshells for weeks. He barely spoke above a whisper in that house. When Frank was home, Leo would practically fold in on himself, trying to take up as little space as possible. He had learned with a speed that broke my heart that loud noises or sudden movements meant Grandpa's attention, and Grandpa's attention meant angry words at best, something worse at worst. Frank had decided from day one that Leo was not the right kind of boy. Too soft, too sensitive, not enough of a real boy. The comments were constant, relentless. Jesus Christ. Sarah, the kid is watching a cooking show. What are you trying to do? Turn him into one of those fancy chef types. Boys should be outside playing football, not learning about soufflés. He does not even like sports. When I was his age, I lived for baseball season. This kid would rather read books about dinosaurs. Dinosaurs. What kind of boy chooses books over balls? You are raising him to be weak. He needs a strong male influence. He needs to learn how to be tough. Back in my day, we did not coddle kids like this. We toughened them up. I had heard variations of these comments 1,000 times. I had learned not to respond because responses only made it worse. But I watched what it did to Leo. I watched my bright, curious, gentle boy start to believe that something was wrong with him, that his interests were shameful, that his sensitivity was a flaw that needed to be beaten out of him. That evening, Leo had been sitting at the kitchen table coloring while Carol cooked. He had been so quiet, so still, barely breathing. But then Carol started making soup, and Leo perked up. He loved cooking shows, loved watching ingredients transform into something delicious. He had been watching kids' baking competitions on TV all week and had been asking me questions about measurements and temperatures. "Grandma, what are you making?" he asked softly, getting up from his chair to peer at the stove. Carol barely glanced at him. "Chicken soup, nothing fancy." Leo watched as she added vegetables to the pot, his eyes following every movement with fascination. "Can I help?" he asked, his voice tentative, testing the waters. "I could stir or add the salt or something." Carol made a sound that could have been agreement or could have been dismissal. I was sitting at the table folding a basket of laundry, keeping one eye on the interaction. Leo took the ambiguous grunt as permission. He carefully pulled a chair over to the stove to give himself some height. He was so small for his age, barely tall enough to see into the pot even with the chair. "Need salt?" Carol muttered more to herself than to Leo. But Leo heard it as an instruction. He reached for the salt shaker on the counter, the big ceramic one that Carol had owned since before I was born. His small hand closed around it, and he lifted it carefully, so carefully, his tongue sticking out slightly in concentration, the way it always did when he was focused on something important. He was reaching toward the pot, rising up slightly on his toes for better reach when it happened. The chair wobbled just slightly. It was not Leo's fault. One of the chair legs was uneven, something I had noticed before but never mentioned. The wobble threw off Leo's balance for just a fraction of a second. His hand jerked. The salt shaker slipped from his grip, tumbled through the air in what felt like slow motion, and hit the very edge of the pot with a hollow thunk. The pot tipped. Just slightly, just enough. Maybe half a cup of hot soup sloshed over the rim and splattered onto the linoleum floor in a steaming puddle of broth chicken chunks and carrot slices. Leo gasped, his eyes going wide with horror. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, his voice high and thin with panic. "I'm sorry, Grandma, I didn't mean to, I'm sorry." For a second, nothing happened. Carol just stood there staring at the mess on her floor. I started to get up from my chair, ready to tell Leo. It was okay, accidents happen, we would clean it up together. Any normal grandmother would have said exactly that. Any reasonable person would have recognized that a 6-year-old trying to help in the kitchen sometimes makes mistakes. But Carol was not normal, and she had never been reasonable. I saw it happen in stages like watching a time-lapse of a storm forming. Her shoulders went rigid. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. Her face started to change color, going from pale to pink to that deep, terrifying crimson that I recognized from 1,000 childhood memories. That shade of red meant someone was about to get hurt. "Mom," I said, standing up quickly. "Mom, it's fine, I'll clean it up. It was just an accident." She did not acknowledge me. She did not say a single word. Her hand shot out and grabbed the cast-iron skillet sitting on the burner beside the soup pot. She had been heating oil in it for cornbread, and that skillet had been on medium heat for at least 10 minutes. The handle was wrapped in a towel because it was too hot to touch with bare hands, but Carol did not care. She ripped the towel off and grabbed the handle with her bare palm. Later, I would notice the burn mark on her hand and marvel at the fact that she had hurt herself in her rage and had not even flinched. In that moment, all I could focus on was the skillet rising up in the air, oil still glistening and the bottom steam rising from the heated iron. She brought it down with all the force of her anger, all the pent-up rage of a woman who had spent her life being mean and bitter and was now being inconvenienced in her own kitchen. The skillet hit the floor right next to the spilled soup with a sound like a gunshot. The impact was so hard that I felt the vibration through the floorboards. Oil splattered. The skillet bounced once and settled with a clang that echoed through the kitchen. But the worst part, the part that would replay in my nightmares for months, was that Leo had instinctively reached down when he dropped the salt. Some automatic response trying to catch it or grab it, or maybe trying to clean up the mess before it got worse. His small hand was right there on the floor. Fingers spread when that heavy cast iron skillet came down. It did not hit his hand directly, thank God, because if it had, his fingers would have been shattered. But the edge of the skillet caught his index and middle finger, pinning them against the hard linoleum for just a second, just long enough for the weight and heat of the iron to do damage before the skillet bounced and rolled away. The sound Leo made was something that will haunt me until the day I die. It was not a scream. It was a yelp, high-pitched and shocked, the sound of a child's brain trying to process pain. It has never experienced before, trying to understand why an adult would hurt him on purpose. He jerked his hand back and clutched it to his chest, and for a moment he just stared at his fingers with this expression of complete bewilderment. Then the pain hit and the tears came. But even crying, even in agony, Leo was trying to be quiet, trying not to make too much noise, trying not to cause more trouble. His sobs were these quiet, hiccuping sounds that came from his throat, and he was biting his lip to keep from wailing the way any normal 6-year-old would wail when they are hurt. I moved without conscious thought. One second I was standing by the table, the next, I was on my knees beside Leo, pulling him into my arms. "Let me see, baby, let me see your hand." He held it out, trembling. His index and middle finger were already swelling the skin, turning an angry crimson that I knew would purple into deep bruises within the hour. The edge of where the skillet had caught him was scraped raw. I could see the beginning of what would be a nasty burn from the heat of the iron. "It hurts," Leo whimpered against my shoulder. "Mama, it hurts so much." "I know, sweetheart, I know." I checked the fingers carefully, gently bending each one. Nothing seemed broken, thank God, but they were badly bruised and the burn was already starting to blister. "We're going to get some ice on this, okay? We're going to make it feel better." I looked up at my mother. This woman who had given birth to me, who had supposedly loved me at some point, who should have been helping her grandson, not hurting him. I felt something inside me crack. Not break, not yet, but crack. Like a frozen lake in early spring, when the ice is starting to weaken. "What the hell did you just do?" The words came out louder than I intended, my voice shaking with adrenaline and shock and the first stirrings of rage. "Mom, what is wrong with you? He is 6 years old. He is a little kid. He made a mistake. What the hell is wrong with you?" Carol turned to look at me, and her eyes were as cold and flat as dirty ice. The same blue eyes I had inherited, the same eyes I saw in the mirror every day, but I prayed to God I never looked at anyone with that much emptiness. "He needs to learn that actions have consequences," she said. Her voice was completely devoid of emotion, like she was reading from a script, like she had not just deliberately hurt a child. "He needs to learn to be more careful. He needs to pay attention to what he is doing. You clearly have not taught him that, so somebody has to. Somebody has to teach him before he gets himself really hurt." "He is a child," I shouted, not caring anymore about keeping my voice down, not caring about the consequences. "You don't teach a child by hurting them. You don't teach anyone that way. This is insane. This is abuse. Do not raise your voice to me in my house," Carol snapped, and now there was heat in her tone. Anger breaking through the ice. "I raised you, didn't I? I raised you and your sister in this house with these rules, and you both turned out fine. This is how children learn. This is how the real world works. Actions have consequences. The sooner he learns that, the better off he will be." I almost laughed. It would have been funny if it was not so tragic. Fine. She thought I turned out fine. I had spent my entire childhood walking on eggshells, terrified of my parents, believing deep in my bones that I was worthless and stupid and would never amount to anything because that is what they told me every single day. I had struggled with anxiety and depression for years. I had stayed in bad relationships because I did not think I deserved better. I had let people walk all over me my entire adult life because I had been trained from birth to believe that my feelings did not matter, that my pain was not important, that love meant enduring whatever someone chose to dish out. Fine was not the word I would have used to describe what their parenting had done to me. But before I could say any of that, before I could find the words to express 28 years of accumulated pain and rage, Frank appeared in the doorway. He was holding his beer in one hand, the TV remote in the other, annoyed at having his game interrupted. He looked at the scene in the kitchen, looked at Leo crying in my arms, looked at me on my knees on the floor, looked at Carol standing there with her arms crossed, looked at the cast iron skillet lying on its side in a puddle of soup. And then he laughed. It was not a sympathetic chuckle or a nervous laugh of surprise. It was a full, deep belly laugh of genuine amusement. The kind of laugh you might make at a funny joke or a comedy show. He was laughing at his grandson's pain. "Good," he said, nodding at Carol like she had just done something praiseworthy. "That is exactly right. Kid needs to learn. That is how you make boys into men right there. You think I didn't get my ass handed to me when I screwed up as a kid? Hell, my old man would have taken a belt to me for making a mess like that. This generation, I swear to God, they are all so soft, so coddled. Everybody gets a participation trophy. Nobody learns that failure hurts. Well, guess what? Life hurts. Better he learns that now." He took a long pull from his beer, his eyes moving from Leo to me, and I saw the contempt there. The same contempt I had seen in those eyes my entire life. I was never good enough for Frank. Never tough enough, never smart enough, never anything enough. And now I was raising a son who was even more disappointing in his eyes. "You are raising him to be a little sissy Sarah," Frank said, his voice taking on that lecturing tone he used when he wanted you to know how stupid you were. "The kid cries at everything. He does not like sports. He does not like getting dirty. He is always reading books or drawing pictures or watching cooking shows. Girl stuff. You're turning him into a little fairy, and that stops now. He needs to toughen up. He needs to learn how to be a real boy. And if you are not going to do it, then by God, Carol and I will do it for you." I got to my feet, still holding Leo against my hip, even though he was getting heavy, my whole body shaking with a cocktail of emotions I could barely name. "Toughening up," I said, and my voice sounded strange in my own ears, distant and echoing. "You call this toughening up, burning a child's hand, deliberately hurting a 6-year-old. This isn't teaching dad. This is child abuse. This is assault. This is wrong, and you know it is wrong." Frank's expression darkened like a storm cloud rolling in. He set his beer down on the counter hard enough that some sloshed over the side. He stepped toward me, using every inch of his 6'2" frame, using his bulk, using the simple physics of being a 230-pound man, moving toward a woman half his size. It was a move he had perfected over decades. Physical intimidation without actually hitting, making you feel small and helpless, without technically raising a hand. He grabbed my shoulder, his fingers digging in through my shirt hard enough that I knew there would be bruises later. Bruises that would match the ones Carol had left on my arms over the years. Bruises I had gotten so good at hiding. "You watch your damn mouth," he said quietly. And somehow the quiet was worse than if he had yelled. His voice carried that dangerous edge that meant he was close to losing control completely. "You are living under my roof. You are eating my food. You are sleeping in my bed that I paid for, in my house that I paid for. You are spending my money and my electricity and my water. That means you follow my rules. That means you show me respect. You do not get to come in here with your fancy ideas about gentle parenting and participation trophies and tell me what I can and cannot do in my own house. Do you understand me?" His fingers dug in harder. Leo whimpered and pressed his face into my neck. I could feel his tears soaking through my shirt, could feel the rapid flutter of his heartbeat against my chest. My own heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to fight back, to push him away, to scream in his face that he was a monster and a bully and everything that was wrong with masculinity, distilled into one bitter, angry old man. But I was terrified. God help me, even after everything, even as a 28-year-old woman with a child of my own, I was terrified of my father. I had been scared of Frank my entire life. Scared of his anger, scared of his fists, scared of the way he could make you feel worthless with just a look. That fear was baked into my bones, into every cell of my body. It was the foundation upon which my childhood had been built. So I did what I had always done. I backed down. I looked at the floor like a scolded child. I felt my shoulders curl inward, felt myself trying to make my body smaller, less threatening, less likely to provoke more anger. Yes, sir, I whispered. I understand. Good. Frank released my shoulder with a little shove that made me stumble back a step. Now take the boy upstairs and clean him up. And he can go to bed without dinner since he wasted food. Actions have consequences, like your mother said. Maybe missing a meal will teach him to be more careful. I opened my mouth to argue that Leo had not eaten lunch and was probably starving, but Frank's expression dared me to say one word. So I closed my mouth and nodded and carried Leo out of the kitchen up the stairs to the tiny bedroom we shared in the back of the house. The room had been a storage room when I was growing up, full of boxes and holiday decorations and junk my parents did not want to look at, but could not bring themselves to throw away. They had cleared it out when I moved back, set up a full-size mattress on the floor with mismatched sheets, given me a plastic dresser with 3 drawers, and acted like they were being incredibly generous. Leo and I slept in that bed together, curled around each other for warmth, because the heating vent in that room barely worked. I sat on the edge of the mattress and set Leo gently beside me. Let me see your hand again, baby. He held it out, and if anything, it looked worse than before. The swelling had increased. The skin around the burn was turning that sick yellowish white that meant blistering was coming. I dug through my bag until I found the small first aid kit I always kept with me. I had learned early in my relationship with Marcus to always be prepared for injuries, because Leo was an active kid who liked to climb and jump and test boundaries. But this was not a scraped knee from playing too rough. This was deliberate harm from an adult who should have been protecting him. I found a small ice pack, cracked it to activate the chemicals inside, and wrapped it in the thinnest towel I had. This is going to hurt at first when I put it on, but then it will start to feel better. Can you be brave for me? Leo nodded, biting his lip. I gently pressed the wrapped ice pack against his fingers. He sucked in a sharp breath, his whole body going tense, but he did not pull away. After a moment, his shoulders started to relax, as the cold began to numb the pain. It hurts, Mama, he whispered, looking up at me with those big brown eyes swimming with tears. It hurts so much. I know, sweetheart. I know it hurts. I am so sorry this happened to you. There was a long pause. Then in a voice so small I almost did not hear it, Leo asked the question I had been dreading. Why did Grandma do that? I didn't mean to spill the soup. It was an accident. I was trying to help. Why did she hurt me on purpose? I did not know how to answer him. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you and protect you are the ones who hurt you the most? How do you explain that some people's brains are wired wrong, that they have so much pain and anger inside them that it spills out onto everyone around them like poison? How do you explain that your own mother and father are fundamentally broken in ways you are only now beginning to understand? She made a mistake, I finally said, though the words tasted like lies in my mouth. Sometimes adults make mistakes too. Sometimes grown-ups do things that are wrong, and they should not do them, but they do them anyway. Is she going to say sorry? Leo asked with the innocent hope of a child who still believed adults followed the same rules kids did. I almost laughed, but it would have come out as a sob. I don't know, baby, maybe. Another lie. Carol would never apologize. Apologizing would mean admitting she was wrong, and people like Carol and Frank could never admit being wrong about anything. Their entire sense of self was built on the foundation of always being right, always being justified, always being the victim of everyone else's poor behavior. Is Grandpa mad at us? Leo whispered. Grandpa is always mad, I said without thinking, and then immediately regretted it. I did not want to poison Leo's mind against his grandparents, even though they deserved it. I had spent my whole life trying to make excuses for my parents, trying to believe that deep down they loved me, even if they had a terrible way of showing it. But then I looked at Leo's bruised and burned fingers, thought about Frank's laugh and Carol's cold indifference, and I realized there was no protecting Leo from the truth anymore. The truth was sitting right here between us, swelling and turning purple before our eyes. We sat there in silence for a long time. Leo's small, warm weight pressed against my side, the ice pack slowly losing its chill. From downstairs, I could hear the TV blaring the sounds of the football game, Frank yelling about a bad call. Normal sounds from a house that had never been normal. That night, after Leo finally fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, his injured hand still swollen and angry-looking. Even hours later, I sat on the floor in that cramped bedroom and let myself fall apart. I pressed my hands over my mouth to muffle the sound and cried. I cried for the little boy sleeping fitfully on the mattress behind me. I cried for the little girl I had been, who had endured the same kind of cruelty, year after year. I cried for all the times I had convinced myself It was not that bad, that all families fought, that this was just how things were in tough working-class homes where people did not have time for feelings. I had thought I knew how bad things were. I had thought the constant criticism was the worst of it. The way they undermined every decision I made about Leo, the snide comments about my weight, about being single, about my failed career, the way Frank would drink himself mean and say things designed to cut deep, the way Carol would give me the silent treatment for days over imagined slights. I had endured all of that and told myself I just needed to get through this rough patch, just needed to get back on my feet, and then Leo and I could leave. But hurting Leo was different. Hurting Leo was a line I had not known existed until they crossed it. I would not let them turn my sweet, sensitive, gentle boy into someone hard and mean like them. I would not let them teach him that violence was an acceptable response to mistakes. I would not let them break his spirit the way they had broken mine. But what could I actually do? The question circled in my mind like a vulture. I had no money except what was left of my savings, maybe $200 if I was lucky. No car, no job prospects in this town, because word had gotten around about the law firm collapse, and nobody wanted to hire someone associated with that mess. No friends left here because I had left 10 years ago, and everyone I knew had either moved away or moved on with their lives. I was completely, utterly trapped. My sister Jessica lived an hour away, but calling her would be worse than pointless. Jessica was the golden child, the one who had somehow managed to stay in Frank and Carol's good graces. By never questioning them, never challenging them, always taking their side against me no matter what. When I was 16 and told Jessica that Dad had shoved me into a wall during an argument, she had said I probably deserved it for talking back. When I was 20 and told her I thought Mom was emotionally abusive, she had laughed and said I was being dramatic. Jessica had a good job as a dental hygienist, a nice house in a suburb with a lawn and a 2-car garage, a husband named Brad who wore polo shirts and worked in insurance and said things like living well is the best revenge, but had never actually been wronged by anyone in his comfortable life. Jessica maintained all of that comfort by pretending our parents were wonderful people who just had high standards and old-fashioned values. She had chosen willful blindness over truth, and I knew she would never help me. I thought about calling the police, actually reached for my phone and pulled up the number before I stopped myself. What would I tell them? That my mother had dropped a hot skillet near my son's hand, and he got hurt. They would ask if it was intentional. I would say yes. My parents would say no. It was an accident. Sarah is being hysterical. She has always been dramatic and unstable. They would say they were trying to help their daughter and grandson, and Sarah just overreacts to everything. It would be my word against theirs, and I had no proof except some bruised fingers that could have happened any number of ways. And if the police did not believe me, if they saw this as just a family dispute, they might send someone from Child Protective Services to investigate. And that thought terrified me more than anything else in the world. Frank and Carol were good at putting on a show. They were good at playing the concerned traditional grandparents just trying to help out their struggling daughter. They would say I was mentally unstable, that I had no job, no income, no plan for the future, that I was raising Leo in unsuitable conditions, that they had taken us in out of charity, and I was sabotaging their attempts to help by making wild accusations. They would make me look like the bad guy. They would make me look like an unfit mother. And there was a real chance, a terrifyingly real chance, that CPS would believe them and take Leo away from me. The system was not designed to protect children from subtle emotional abuse and occasional physical cruelty that never left marks bad enough to photograph. The system was overwhelmed, underfunded, and more likely to remove a child from a mother with no resources than from grandparents with a house and steady Social Security checks. I could not risk it. I could not risk losing Leo. He was everything. He was the only good thing I had ever created, the only pure and beautiful thing in my life. I would die before I let them take him from me. So I made a decision that night, sitting on that floor in that dark room while my son slept and my parents watched TV downstairs like they had not just committed assault on a child. I decided that we had to leave. We had to get out of this house, even if I had no idea where we would go or how we would survive. Even if we ended up homeless sleeping in my broken car in some parking lot somewhere, it would be better than staying here. It would be better than watching my son learn to be afraid of the people who should love him most. Anything would be better than staying in that house one more day. I waited until nearly midnight. I could hear Frank snoring from the master bedroom down the hall, that freight train rumble that meant he had drunk himself into his usual stupor. Carol would be dead asleep too. She took pills for anxiety, though I suspected it was more about numbing herself to her own miserable life than actual medical need. The pills knocked her out cold for hours. I moved quietly, methodically. I had a small duffel bag that I packed with a few changes of clothes for me and Leo toiletries, the first aid kit, and my laptop. I grabbed my important documents from the folder I kept hidden under the mattress. Leo's birth certificate, my own birth certificate, my social security card, what was left of my tax returns. I pulled out my phone and checked my bank account. $243. That was all I had in the world. I was about to zip up the bag when I remembered something. A few months ago, when I had first moved back in, I had been helping Frank clean out the garage. He had this old USB drive that he kept in a drawer full of random junk. He had told me it had some old work files on it, nothing important, but I remembered the way he had said it, the way he had quickly grabbed it and put it in his pocket when he saw me looking at it. Frank was not subtle when he was hiding something. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake them up. I slipped into their bedroom and saw Frank sprawled on his back, one arm flung out, mouth open. Carol was curled on her side, facing away from him. I tiptoed to Frank's dresser, where he emptied his pockets every night. There, under his wallet and some loose change, was the USB drive. I took it. I do not know why exactly. Some instinct told me it might be useful. If Frank was hiding it, there had to be a reason. I slipped it into my jeans pocket and retreated back to my room. Waking Leo up was the hardest part. He was such a heavy sleeper, and I hated to disturb him. But I shook him gently and whispered, "Leo, baby, wake up. We need to go." He blinked at me groggily. "Where are we going?" "On an adventure," I said, forcing my voice to sound cheerful and calm, even though I was shaking inside. "We are going to go stay somewhere else for a while, but we need to be very, very quiet, okay? Like we are secret agents on a mission." That got his attention. Leo loved pretending to be a spy. He nodded seriously and let me help him into his shoes and jacket. I put the duffel bag over my shoulder, took his good hand in mine, and we crept down the stairs. Every step seemed to creak loud enough to wake the dead. I held my breath as we passed the living room, where Frank's recliner sat empty, where the television was still on, but muted, casting flickering blue light across the walls. We made it to the front door. I unlocked it slowly, praying the deadbolt would not make noise. The cool night air hit my face as I eased the door open, and I felt the first real breath of freedom I had experienced in months. I pulled out my phone and opened the Uber app. I had $50 in cash in my wallet, but I used the app because I wanted a record of where I was going in case something happened. The app said a driver named Marcus was 8 minutes away. I walked Leo down to the end of the driveway, and we waited in the shadows of the big oak tree that had been there since I was a kid. Those 8 minutes felt like hours. Every car that passed made my heart jump. Every rustle of leaves made me think someone was coming. But finally, Marcus pulled up in a silver Prius. I opened the back door, helped Leo in, climbed in after him, and said to Marcus, "The Sunset Motor Lodge on Route 47, please." Marcus glanced at me in the rearview mirror. He was middle-aged with kind eyes and graying temples. He did not ask questions, but I saw him notice the duffel bag, the way Leo was falling back asleep against my side. My disheveled appearance at midnight on a Sunday. "Everything okay, miss?" he asked quietly. "It will be," I said. The Sunset Motor Lodge was exactly what you would expect from a place that charged $45 a night. It was a single-story strip of rooms, painted a faded yellow with a flickering neon sign out front that only had 3 letters still working. It was on the outskirts of town, near the highway. The kind of place where truckers stopped for a few hours of sleep and people asked no questions about why you needed a room in the middle of the night. The office was barely lit. A bell rang when I pushed open the door. Behind the counter sat a man reading a paperback novel. He looked up, and I got my first good look at him. He was maybe 40, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that looked like they had seen too much. He wore a faded Marines t-shirt. "Help you?" he asked, setting down his book. His voice was quiet, calm. "I need a room," I said. "Just for tonight, maybe longer. I am not sure yet." He nodded slowly, studying me. I knew what he was seeing. A woman alone with a young child arriving after midnight with nothing but a duffel bag, eyes red from crying, the kind of exhausted desperation that came from running away from something bad. "90 for 2 nights, he said. "Includes Wi-Fi. Checkout is at 11, but I am flexible." I pulled out my last 250s and slid them across the counter. He handed me a key attached to a green plastic tag with the number 7 on it. "I am David," he said. "I manage this place. You need anything, you let me know." "Thank you," I said. "Room is at the end. It is quiet there. People leave you alone." The way he said it made me think he understood exactly what kind of alone I needed. The room was small and smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner, but the sheets looked clean and the lock on the door worked. I put Leo on one of the double beds and covered him with the thin blanket. He did not even stir. I sat on the other bed and just stared at the wall for a while, trying to process what I had just done. I had left. After all these years of taking their abuse, of believing I deserved it, of telling myself things would get better, I had finally left. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt terrified. Because leaving was just the first step. Now I had to figure out how to survive. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains, and Leo, already awake watching cartoons on the ancient television, bolted to the dresser. His fingers still looked bruised, but the swelling had gone down. He seemed remarkably unbothered by the fact that we were in a strange motel room. I bought us breakfast from the vending machine outside the office. Stale donuts and juice boxes, not exactly nutritious, but it was what I could afford. While Leo ate, I tried to make a plan. I needed a job. I needed money. I needed to figure out if Frank and Carol would come looking for us. That afternoon, David knocked on our door. I opened it cautiously, keeping the chain lock on. "Hey," he said. "I do not mean to intrude, but I was wondering something. You planning to stay a while?" "I might need to," I said carefully, "if that is okay." "Here's the thing," David said. "I could use some help around here. The place needs cleaning, basic maintenance stuff. Previous housekeeper quit last week, and I have not found a replacement. I could not pay much, but I could cover your room and give you maybe $150 a week cash. You interested?" I almost cried right there. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes." "Good," he said. "You can start whenever, and look, I do not know your situation and I am not asking. But I was in the service for 12 years. I saw a lot of things. I recognize when someone is running from something. You need anything, you let me know." That is how I started working at the Sunset Motor Lodge. It was not glamorous. I cleaned rooms, changed sheets, scrubbed toilets, fixed broken blinds, repainted scuffed walls. But it was honest work, and David was a good man. He let Leo hang out in the office during the day, gave him old magazines to read, and paper to draw on. He never asked me personal questions. He just provided a safe space when I needed it most. For 2 weeks, I lived in a strange kind of limbo. I was free from Frank and Carol, but I was also waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew they would not just let me disappear. They would see it as a challenge to their authority, a sign of disrespect. My father, in particular, would be furious that I had dared to defy him. I got my answer on a Thursday afternoon. I was cleaning room 12 when I heard a car pull up outside. Through the window, I saw a familiar silver BMW. My stomach dropped. Jessica. My sister looked exactly like I remembered. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, even though it was barely fall. She walked into the office, and I heard her talking to David. Heard her ask if he had seen Sarah Miller and a young boy. To his credit, David said he could not give out information about guests. But Jessica was persistent, and eventually I heard my name being called. I stepped out of the room I had been cleaning. Jessica spotted me immediately. Her expression was a mixture of shock and something that looked like satisfaction. She walked over her heels, clicking on the concrete. "Sarah," she said. "Wow, I cannot believe this is where you ended up. Mom said you had really hit rock bottom, but I did not realize she meant this." "What do you want, Jessica?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom and Dad are worried sick about you," she said, though her tone suggested they were more angry than worried. "You left in the middle of the night without saying anything. You took Leo. Do you have any idea how that made them feel?" "Do I know how that made them feel?" I repeated, incredulous. "Did they tell you what happened? Did they tell you that Mom assaulted Leo, that she hurt him?" Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "Mom said Leo had a little accident. He spilled something and burned his hand on hot soup. She was trying to help him, and he got scared, and you completely overreacted. You made it into this huge dramatic thing like you always do." I stared at my sister and realized she was completely brainwashed. Or maybe she knew the truth and just did not care. Either way, she was not going to be an ally. "That is not what happened," I said quietly. "But I can see there is no point in arguing with you. Look," Jessica said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "I am going to be straight with you. Mom and Dad are done playing nice. If you do not bring Leo back home, they are going to call Child Protective Services. They are going to tell them that you are an unfit mother, that you are living in a disgusting motel, that you have no job, no stability, that you basically kidnapped their grandson and are raising him in dangerous conditions. The words hit me like a physical blow. CPS, that was my worst nightmare. They would not do that, I said, but even as I said it, I knew they absolutely would. They would, and they will, Jessica confirmed. And honestly, Sarah, can you blame them? Look at where you are. Look at what you are doing. You are scrubbing toilets in a flea bag motel and living in a room that probably has bedbugs. Is that really what you want for your son? It is better than being around people who hurt him, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Jessica looked at me with something close to pity. You always were so dramatic, always playing the victim, always acting like Mom and Dad were these terrible monsters when they just wanted what was best for us. They sacrificed so much to raise us, and this is how you repay them, by stealing their grandson and making them look like villains. Get out, I said. Tell them whatever you want. I am not going back, and I am not bringing Leo back there. You are making a huge mistake, Jessica said. When CPS shows up, do not say I did not warn you. She turned on her heel and walked back to her car, and I watched her drive away with a sick feeling in my stomach. I went back to my room where Leo was napping and just sat there trying not to panic. Jessica was right about one thing. If Frank and Carol called CPS and made me look like an unstable parent, I could lose Leo. I had no permanent address, no steady job, nothing to show that I could provide for my son. The fact that I was running from abuse would not matter if they made me look incompetent or dangerous. That is when I remembered the USB drive. I had not thought about it since the night we left. I pulled it out of my bag and stared at it. What was on here that Frank wanted to keep hidden? I went to the office and found David. Can I use a computer? I asked. I need to check something and I do not have one here. Library has computers, he said. About 2 miles down the road. They are free to use if you have a card, but I think they let anyone use them for an hour a day. I bundled Leo into his jacket and we walked to the library. It was a small brick building that smelled like old books and floor wax. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes and reading glasses on a chain, helped me sign up for a temporary visitor card and showed me to the computer area. I sat down, logged in, and plugged in the USB drive. My hands were shaking. What was I even looking for? There were several folders on the drive. Work receipts, insurance claims, tax docs. I opened the first one. What I found made my blood run cold. These were not legitimate work receipts. These were doctored documents. Frank had run a small construction and handyman business for years, mostly under the table stuff. But some of his jobs were legitimate contracts with the county and local businesses. The receipts on this drive showed he had been inflating his expenses, claiming he bought materials from suppliers when he had actually gotten them cheaper elsewhere or used salvaged materials. He pocketed the difference. The insurance claims folder was even worse. There were claims for workplace injuries that never happened, for damaged equipment that was never damaged, for theft that never occurred. Frank had been committing insurance fraud for years, and Carol had been helping him do the bookwork. The tax documents showed years of unreported income, cash jobs that never made it onto their tax returns. Employees paid under the table, so Frank did not have to pay payroll taxes or workers' comp insurance. It was all here. Evidence of fraud, tax evasion, and multiple other crimes spanning at least 15 years. I sat back in the chair and tried to process what I was looking at. This was not just a smoking gun. This was an entire arsenal. Frank had kept all of this evidence probably because he needed it for his own records, or because he was too arrogant to think anyone would ever find it. He had always been sloppy about covering his tracks because he never thought he would get caught. And now I had it all. I thought about what Jessica had said. They were going to call CPS. They were going to try to take Leo from me. They were going to destroy my life, just like they had tried to destroy my spirit for 28 years. But for once, I had something they did not know about. For once, I had power. I created a new email account under a fake name. I spent the next hour organizing the files into clear categories: fraudulent receipts, insurance fraud, tax evasion. I wrote a brief cover letter explaining that these documents had been obtained from Francis Miller's business records and that they showed systematic fraud and tax evasion. I kept it factual and impersonal. Then I sent it to 2 places. First to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, second to the State Insurance Fraud Bureau. I included specific dates, amounts, and details that would make it easy for them to investigate. I did not sign it with my real name. I did not need credit. I just needed justice. When I clicked send, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was not doing this out of revenge, though. I would be lying if I said revenge was not part of it. I was doing it out of self-defense. Frank and Carol had declared war on me when they threatened to take Leo. They had thrown the first punch when Carol hurt my son. All I was doing was making sure they could not hurt us anymore. Over the next 3 weeks, I heard nothing from my parents. No phone calls, no more visits from Jessica. Nothing. I started to think maybe Jessica had been bluffing about CPS. I kept working at the motel, saving every penny I could. David had increased my hours and given me a small raise. I was making enough to start looking at apartments, though it would be months before I could afford first and last month's rent plus a deposit. Then one afternoon in mid-October, I saw something that made my heart skip. I was taking Leo to the playground at the park near the library when we drove past my parents' house. There was a tow truck in the driveway loading up Frank's beloved F-250 pickup truck that he had owned for 20 years. And there on the lawn was a sign I recognized from when the housing market crashed in 2008. Foreclosure, notice of default, property subject to sale. I pulled over and just stared. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. It was happening. The IRS and the fraud investigators had moved faster than I had expected. They must have found the evidence compelling. They had frozen assets, seized accounts, started the process of collecting what Frank owed in back taxes and fraud restitution. I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, yes. There was a sense of justice being served. But there was also a small child-like part of me that felt sad. These were my parents. This was the house I grew up in. And I had been the one to set it all in motion. But then I looked in the backseat at Leo, at his little hands holding his favorite stuffed dinosaur, at the way he smiled when he saw a dog walking past, and I remembered why I had done it. I remembered the sound of that skillet hitting the floor. I remembered Frank's laugh. I remembered Carol's cold indifference, and the sadness evaporated. They had made their choices. They had chosen cruelty over kindness. They had chosen control over love. And now they were facing the consequences of decades of those choices. 2 days later, they showed up at the motel. I was in the office with David going over the schedule for next week when the door opened and there they were. Frank looked smaller, somehow diminished. He was not wearing his usual swagger. Carol looked haggard, her hair unwashed, her face drawn. They spotted me and Frank's expression shifted from desperate to angry in an instant. "You," he said, pointing at me. "This is your fault. What the hell did you do?" David stood up, putting himself slightly between me and Frank. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave," he said calmly. "Stay out of this," Frank snapped at him. He turned back to me. "They came to the house, federal agents. They seized our bank accounts. They took our records. They are saying we owe hundreds of thousands in back taxes and fraud penalties. They are taking everything. The house, the truck, all of it. What did you do?" I looked at him and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "I did not do anything," I said. "You did this to yourself. You broke the law for years and years. You committed fraud. You evaded taxes. You stole money. All I did was make sure the right people found out about it." Carol made a strangled sound. "How could you do this to us?" she said. "We are your parents. We raised you. We took you in when you had nowhere else to go. You took me in so you could control me," I said. "You hurt my son. You terrorized him. You laughed about it. You were going to call CPS to try to take him away from me. Did you really think I was just going to let you destroy my life and his, without fighting back?" Frank took a step toward me, but David moved, blocking his path. David was not as big as Frank, but he had a quiet authority that made Frank hesitate. "Sir, I am former military police," David said quietly. "I am asking you nicely one more time to leave. If you do not leave, I will call the sheriff and have you removed for trespassing and harassment." Frank's face was red with rage, but he seemed to realize he had no power here. "You have destroyed your family," he said to me. "You have destroyed everything. I hope you are happy." "I did not destroy anything," I said, and my voice was steady, now strong. "You built your life on lies and violence and cruelty, and now it has all collapsed under its own weight. You taught me a lot of things growing up, Dad. You taught me that the world was harsh and unforgiving. You taught me that only the strong survive. You taught me to never show weakness. Well, congratulations. You finally taught me how to be strong enough to walk away from you." I turned to Carol. You always wondered why I never became the woman you wanted me to be, why I never measured up, why I was always such a disappointment. You know what I finally realized? I did not want to be like you. I did not want to be cold and mean and bitter. I wanted to be someone who breaks the cycle instead of continuing it. So thank you, I guess, for showing me exactly who I never want to become. Carol started to cry then, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of self-pity. Sarah, please, she said. You have to help us. We have nothing. We are going to lose the house. Where are we going to go? I do not know, I said. And honestly, I do not care. You never cared where I was going to go when you made my life hell. You never cared about what Leo needed when you hurt him. You only care now because you need something from me. But I have nothing left to give you. You used it all up years ago. You are going to regret this, Frank said, his voice shaking with impotent rage. Family is everything. You do not turn on family. You turned on me every day of my life, I said. You turned on me every time you told me I was not good enough. Every time you hit me or screamed at me or made me feel worthless. Every time you chose control over love. You did this, not me. I just finally stopped letting you get away with it. David opened the door. Time to go, he said firmly. Frank and Carol left, and I watched through the window as they got into an old sedan I did not recognize, probably a loaner or a rental, since their vehicles had been seized. They drove away, and I realized I might never see them again. And I was okay with that. The next few months passed in a blur of small victories. I saved enough money to rent a tiny apartment in a better part of town. It was just a one-bedroom, but it had a real kitchen, and the heat worked, and the neighbors were quiet. Leo started first grade at the local elementary school. He loved his teacher, made friends quickly, and his report card said he was a joy to have in class. I got a job at a small accounting firm as a receptionist. It was not much, but it was better than cleaning motel rooms, and there was potential to move up. The office manager said if I took some community college courses, she could train me to be an accounts assistant. I enrolled in night classes studying while Leo did his homework at the kitchen table. David and I stayed in touch. He became a good friend, someone I could talk to when things got hard. Someone who understood what it was like to rebuild your life from scratch. He had been through his own version of hell in Afghanistan, and the years after. He did not judge me. He just supported me. I heard through the grapevine that Frank and Carol had declared bankruptcy. They lost the house, the business, everything. Last I heard, they were living in a trailer park about 50 miles away. Jessica stopped speaking to me entirely, which was fine. I did not need people in my life who would side with abusers. One Saturday in early spring, I took Leo to the park. It was one of those perfect days where the sun was warm, but not too hot, where the sky was blue and endless. Leo had healed completely from his injury. The bruises had faded months ago. He was running around on the playground laughing with other kids, completely carefree. David showed up with ice cream cones for all of us. He and I sat on a bench watching Leo play. You did good, David said quietly. Look at him. He is happy. He is safe. That is all because of you. It is because of you too, I said. If you had not given me a chance, I do not know where we would be right now. You would have figured it out, David said. You are stronger than you think. I watched Leo swing higher and higher, his laughter ringing out across the park. He looked so different from that scared little boy in my parents' kitchen. He was confident now, joyful. He knew he was loved unconditionally. He knew he was safe. People ask me sometimes if I regret what I did, if I feel guilty about destroying my parents financially. The answer is no, not even a little bit. They spent decades building an empire of fear and control on a foundation of lies and illegal activity. All I did was expose the truth. The consequences were their own doing. What I did was not revenge. It was survival. It was protection. It was making sure that two toxic, dangerous people could never hurt me or my son again. And in doing that, I taught Leo the most important lesson I could teach him. I taught him that you do not have to accept cruelty from anyone, not even family. I taught him that it is okay to walk away from people who hurt you. I taught him that standing up for yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. My parents wanted to make Leo into someone hard and mean like them. Instead, they accidentally made me into someone strong enough to break free. Frank always said the world was about survival of the fittest. Turns out he was right. And I was the one who survived. Sometimes I drive past that foreclosed house. It has been bought by a young family now. There are children's toys in the yard and flowers planted by the mailbox. It looks happy. It looks like a home. I am glad it is no longer a place where children learn to be afraid. As for me, I am still rebuilding, still healing, still learning how to exist without that constant weight of fear and obligation. But every day gets a little easier. Every day I look at my son and I remember why I fought so hard. And every day I am grateful that I found the courage to save us both. That is the thing about breaking free from toxic family. People will tell you that blood is thicker than water. They will tell you that you owe your parents everything. They will tell you that walking away makes you a bad person. But here's what I learned. The full saying is the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means that the relationships you choose, the bonds you create through shared experience and mutual respect, are stronger than the bonds you are born into. I chose to protect my son. I chose to build a life free from abuse. I chose myself. And I would make that choice again every single day for the rest of my life. Calm. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from family members who were toxic? Have you ever had to make the hard choice to put yourself or your children first, even when everyone told you that you owed your family loyalty? Drop your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope or made you feel less alone, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and your story matters too. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know below.